Hi, Jeremy here, Modern Vitality. In today's video, we'll be looking at fibromyalgia and some nuances around this diagnosis and this disease. Now, really, at the end of the day, most people just want to get better. That's where I focus. That's where I do my best work. People who want to get better, they need real strategies to heal. However, I would offer with some of these conditions, they have a bit of a credibility problem, like fibromyalgia. Is it fake? Right? Some people think it's not real, it's made up. Sometimes you get the diagnosis and it doesn't really help. So it's like, what is going on here? Well, is it real? Is it fake? Actually, the answer is probably both. I'm going to look at both sides of this in this video so that you can have more information about your condition, what you're dealing with, and then have a very clear foundation to stand on as you work to get better. All right, let's get started. So within a healing journey, there's a process most people go through. Step one is they start to realize things aren't right. All these symptoms, all these problems, you start to feel not normal. Like, oh, everybody else can do all these things, but I run out of gas and I start to get tired, or I'm having all these pain flares or whatever it is, right? My life is not what it used to be. We tend to see that, right? That's like step one. Step two is then you try to get help. So oftentimes, go to the doctor, go to your first point of contact, go to the doctor says, oh, we're going to run the labs and all this. And then there's usually this kind of subset of the second step where there's a lot of incredulity, meaning that doctors might say, well, your labs look good, there's nothing wrong with you. And then you say, well, that's interesting, but I still feel like something's wrong with me. Even though the numbers look good on the paper, how come, I'm bedridden, basically? Or how come I can't think anymore, right? How come I'm doing a shrinking world where I feel like I can't make plans anymore. I can't stick to things. I can't be there for the people I love. I'm refusing to travel because I don't want to commit to that because I'm afraid to let people down, right? How come all that? If the numbers look good, how come I'm not good, right? And then there's some divergent paths where then the doctors may say, well, this is all in your head. I want to send you out to, a psychiatrist, or you're going to need to take antidepressants or whatever else. And you say, well, it's not all in my head. And can be some argument there. And of course, this is the dignity, right? Is like, you want to salvage your dignity. You don't want medical professionals treating you like you're a non-human, like you don't know what's going on with your own body. It's crazy, right? That you have to go through this process, but so many people do, right? And then you fight tooth and nail sometimes to just get somebody to acknowledge that there's actually something wrong, right? And then once you do, you can get this diagnosis. So sometimes it's fibromyalgia, sometimes it's chronic fatigue, sometimes like now we have long haulers. There's all kinds of these different diagnoses that can come in. And oftentimes, unfortunately, here's the next part, right? So once you get the diagnosis, you can feel validated and you can go, see, I knew something was wrong. This is a condition. Thank you, right? But then the next step is, okay, I've got the diagnosis. So now what? Where's this going? And I've said this before. I'm going to say it many times, right? Probably say this 10,000 times. The strength of a diagnosis has to do with the quality of treatment it leads to. Right? If you get a diagnosis, but there's no treatment associated with that, it's a garbage diagnosis, right? I mean, I don't mean to be so black and white about this, but that's the strength of a diagnosis. The diagnosis isn't an endpoint. The diagnosis is meant to be a bridge to a solution. However, with these conditions, they've created diagnoses like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, long hauler syndrome, all these things that don't lead anywhere. They're bridges to nowhere. So yes, you get an answer, you get some validation, you get a disease name to make you, right, to help other people realize that, yeah, I'm not crazy, right? To make you feel validated there, which you're not crazy, obviously, right? Why would you make this up, So you have that, but now the diagnosis doesn't go anywhere. So this is where we start to get these different vantage points where people are like, hey, these conditions are made up. These conditions are fake. Because real conditions, right, things that people have an easier time understanding tend to respond to a treatment with some level of predictability. So for example, if you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I've got all these symptoms, I don't feel good. And the doctor says, oh, well, we did a test. It looks like you have a staph infection, right? You're going to need to take these antibiotics to kill the staph and then you'll feel better. And there's this process. And now you go through this whole like prophecy of the diagnosis and then the treatment and then you're better. That kind of, the whole thing reinforces itself. And you say, well, yeah, I'm better because I took the medicine that was for this diagnosis. Of course, it's a real diagnosis. It led to real medicine and real results, right? But with these mystery conditions, mystery illnesses, there's too much vagary going on. So we have the diagnosis, but it doesn't lead anywhere. So it doesn't validate itself. So you'll have other people coming in saying, well, these conditions are fake, right? These conditions are made up. There's a credibility problem here. And while I would get into the technicals here, that there is a credibility problem because they've just made up catch-all names, blanket names. I've said before, I've called these they're garbage diagnoses. I mean, no offense to the people, right? The humans that have these conditions, here's the differentiation. The humans that have these conditions, right? If you're watching this, you know that you have a real condition. The brain fog, the fatigue, the chronic pains, maybe some anxiety, maybe some insomnia, maybe some bowel disturbance, right? Inflammation everywhere, maybe some migraines, all this stuff, right? That's real. That's real. But the name is about useless, right? Unfortunately. And the reason why, okay, is because this is a very, very minute thing, and you've got to understand this, okay? They've created names that are catch-all diagnoses that basically are describing symptom clusters, right? Symptom clusters. So you can have these kind of presentations where you go, okay, I've got tender points here, and I have a lot of fatigue and all that, and you can kind of qualify for one of these diagnoses, right? It's a very soft diagnosis, but at the very least, it acknowledges and validates that something's not right with you, right? And it can help you. You can use that word to do research. So if you get diagnosed with, like, let's say fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue or long haulers or any other ones, you now have something to type in, right? When you're researching for yourself what to do, which can be helpful, right? But really, they're looking at symptom clusters. They're not looking at system causes, okay? System causes. We need to be looking at the underlying reasons why these symptom clusters are manifesting. And that's where our power is. It's a whole different framework. Now, I know I've got a background. It's a very strong background in Eastern medicine. That's where I lean, right? This is kind of my bias. And I'm willing to come out from that lens whenever it's appropriate. But for the most part, having a functional lens of Eastern medicine means we're looking at systematic causes, which is why, if you've been around my work for any period of time, you've seen me always talking about immune system, step 1, digestive system, 2, neuroadrenals, that's 3, blood circulation, 4, right? There's kind of a 5th stage that not everybody needs to get to. It's more about supplementing at that point. We're looking at like mitochondria and hormones and these kinds of things. But for the most part, if you can get sorted out with these first few stages, you'll notice tremendous benefits in terms of your energy level, your vitality, your healing, right? But that's because we're looking at systems. We're working on our systems, not our symptoms. Okay, this is a big deal. Symptoms emerge from systemic imbalance, right? So if the immune system is having a hard time, if there are hidden pathogens, for example, and this is why oftentimes mold, mycotoxins, Lyme disease, right? They have an actual causative agent, an actual pathogen, Candida, Epstein-Barr virus. There's an actual pathogen that's been identified. I know with long haulers, we have a pathogen, right? But even then, there's some variability about which pathogen it actually is, because these pathogens aren't just coming from one vector, right? So if you see somebody with like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, and then later they get a Lyme diagnosis, and they think, oh, well, now that makes sense, right? These fibro symptoms were coming from Lyme, right? Or, oh, mold, mycotoxins, right? Oh, okay, these chronic fatigue symptoms are coming from mycotoxin exposure, right? Now, long haulers is a whole other deal because we're looking at basically an engineered pathogen, right? Coming in, creating that. And it can be coming through several vectors, right? Sometimes it's in the bloodstream. It's not even something you've inhaled, right? It's not respiratory. It's a blood vector, different deal, right? So you've got all these different vectors, all these different pathogens, but you start to see, okay, that's what's causing an issue in the immune system. So now that's where we're getting the systemic imbalance from, right? That's not the symptoms. We're not looking at symptoms yet. We're looking at the systemic causes of the symptom clusters. So if you don't go after that at a system level, you're always going to be chasing symptoms. And that's one of the reasons why people have a hard time like believing these diagnoses, because they're very soft. They don't show up on labs very often, if at all. Even Lyme, which is very much an active infection right in there, but that it can hide, right? It can go dormant. It can be in remission, and you'll get these false negative tests, right? It's not that cut and dry. So people have a hard time believing in these conditions because the medical establishment's not that good at actually detecting them yet, which is fine, but also because the paradigm, the way we're looking at things, is to try to look for a label that makes sense instead of trying to look at the actual systemic imbalances. So for me, to be honest, when somebody comes into my world and they're asking for help, it actually doesn't matter a lot to me if they have mold, Lyme, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, candida, long haulers, Epstein-Barr, adrenal fatigue, autoimmune. That information is important, it's helpful, but it's like 10% or less. The most important is, what are the state of the systems within this body in front of me? Because no matter what you got going on, if we can get your systems working better, you are going to leverage your natural processes of detoxification and elimination. You're going to leverage your inflammatory cycles completing themselves instead of smoldering. You're going to leverage your own ways to wake your mitochondria back up on your own, right? We're going to leverage that via systems, not symptoms. And we actually don't even need to really know which disease you have, right? It turns into just word games after a certain point. So I would encourage you, depending on where you are in your stages of healing, maybe you just are at the early stage where you know something's wrong, right? But you haven't gotten any kind of validation. You can skip all that, getting a diagnosis, and you can just start working on your body systems. You can operate independently of a Western diagnosis. Absolutely, right? But if you're looking for that, if you want that peace of mind, then I would say don't give up, right? Even if doctors are telling you, well, your labs look normal, I don't know what it is, right? We can't help you. Come back if it's worse, right? They say all that kind of stuff. Or you don't look sick, that's another one, right? Of course, you try really hard not to look sick, right? You put in a lot of effort to do that. So anyway, if they're blowing you off, right, like that, and they're kind of gaslighting you, get a different doctor, right? If that's something you want to pursue, don't give up until you get a diagnosis to answer that, if you feel like you need that kind of certainty. But what I will say is a lot of these things are bridges to nowhere. So don't be attached to the bridge, right? Always be ready to go to that next stage where you're looking at body systems in the right order, maximizing that, healing that at that level, and then you don't even really have to worry about what your diagnosis is or was. It's just a whole different way of looking at it. We have a group, by the way. If you're struggling, no matter what stage you're in, if you're struggling with a complex chronic health condition, maybe you don't want to do it alone. Maybe you want company. Maybe you want to be in an international group with a bunch of lovely people who are all working on their systems, trying to get healthier, overcoming complex chronic conditions, right? Maybe you want to be in there. I'm in there every single day, answering questions, giving my perspective. You can come in, you can ask me anything. It's free to join as a guest. We've got a vault full of interactive videos to help you really get dialed in on what's going on with you so you can figure out what your next steps are. It's a great place to be. You'll find the application in the description below this video. Right, that's where the link is. You're a detective, you'll find it. And, do your best with that. Be thorough, be thoughtful. This is my chance to get to know you. And if your application looks really good, I'll get you in as soon as I can. Our group does tend to fill up. It's cozy, so be prepared. It might be a wait. I'm doing my best to get people in and give everybody a fair opportunity to come in and join. But it might be a month, it might be more before you hear back. So just be patient, okay? I'm doing my best to get everybody through, but we do fill up. So there's the application. Why do it alone? You got great people. So I hope this helps you get some clarity, and try not to fall into the arguments. Really, is it fake? Is it real? I don't believe, whatever. Stop worrying about what other people think anyway, and focus internally on your body systems, right? That's going to be your fastest, highest leverage path towards healing. I hope this helps you. Let's get you feeling better. Cheers.